Yes, I'm Brian Basham. I'm a former journalist with the Times and the Telegraph and the Daily Mail, but I don't usually tell people that. Such a disgraceful paper. I was set to investigate Bob Maxwell when I was a young journalist, a very young journalist, on the Telegraph in about 1971. So that's when I first met Bob. I then did quite a diligent job on investigating him to such an extent that when he then left the city under a cloud and went off to run Bergman Press and wanted to come back to buy a company called BPC, a bit of a company called British Printing Corporation. He approached his corporate finance advisor, a man called Charles Williams, who was chairman of a little merchant bank called Ansbacher, and said to Charles, I want to, what's Brian Basham doing these days? Because he knew I had, at that time, started a public relations company, corporate communications company, really. And Charles knew me very well and reintroduced us. By the way, Charles became Lord Williams and is the stepfather of the Archbishop of Canterbury, so he's quite exalted. And he's now dead, sadly, I miss him. And Bob invited me to meet him on Boxing Day, 1981. And so I drove up from my parents' house where we were spending Christmas in Hastings. It was an awful drive. It was icy and snow, and anyway. And I went in to have what I thought was a private meeting with Bob, and I found myself at a formal family Boxing Day lunch with the whole family, which is how I first met the boys and Ghislaine.
How did the relationship develop from there with
well,
that must have been quite hard because you were obviously you were investigating.
No, I had been investigating Bob, and then I don't want to go into too much, but I will go into what you like. I started to investigate the connection between organised crime and the city, and I went undercover in a bill-breaking house because a very famous gangster called Tony Schneider was money laundering his the craze money, the Maureen Reggie craze money through the bill market, and I went and doing it, and it got very dangerous. And we had just had my first wife and I had just had our daughters, and he threatened the children of my informant. And I thought, now I'd been threatened myself on a number of occasions, but I just went out, walked into a bar, met a man who had helped me when I was investigating Bob, because he was a man called John Addy. He was Rupert Murdoch's PR man, so it's all very convoluted. But so I drifted into public relations quite unintentionally, and it was a great learning curve. John was a very clever barrister, and it became a very entertaining life, And then Bob decided to come back, asked for me. Charles introduced me, reintroduced me, and I was very happy to get involved with him because I always, I knew he was no better than he should be, but I was rather liked him, I have to say. I used to, and I still miss that call that used to come through. Basham, Maxwell here, can you get over? It's big deal time. So it's good fun. And go over and take the helicopter off the top of them and go out to Paris or something. And anyway, so I got to know them all terribly well. And then years later, one of my friends and contacts was a man called John Todd, who was investigating the Maxwells and investigating Ian and Kevin, And he's the chap who had the wonderful line when he knocked on Kevin's door at 6:15 one morning, and Kevin's then wife, very feisty lady called Pandora, leant out the window and said, "Fuck off or I'll call the police," because she thought it was a journalist. And John had the great pleasure of saying, "Madam, I am the police," and I just sort of, I saw him a lot, and then the boys got arrested, and I think Kevin called me and said, "Look, got any thoughts?" And so I didn't go in and help them, but I introduced them to somebody who I said, look, this is what you have to do. And principally, all I said to them was, look, don't try to avoid the press. Just book a room and say, come in out of the cold and let's have a cup of tea and talk about it. And that's what they did, and it helped. And of course, they were thoroughly and firmly acquitted. So that was very helpful. And then there are great gaps in this, whether we can call it a relationship, really. And then, I don't know, 10 years ago or more, I think Kevin called me and said, look, will you help Ghislaine with her Terra Mar project? And so I said, sure. I didn't charge for this, so I just was very interested. And I went to meet her, and I was very impressed by what she was trying to do. She was trying to, I always used to say to people, this is a magic wand, and wave the pen, and say, this is a magic wand. You've got 10 seconds to tell me what you want, because otherwise you burble on forever, don't you? Like I am now. And and she said, I want to get a representative appointed at the United Nations for the oceans. And that's what she achieved. It was a most remarkable thing. And if you look on YouTube, you looked, I'm sure.
Yeah, I've watched.
See her presenting to a committee of the United Nations. So it was a most amazing achievement. Then in the middle of that, this woman, Virginia Roberts, as she was then, cropped up. And Ghislaine said, look, I've got to do something about this. And I said, well, that's really not what I want to do with my life. And I introduced her again to somebody else, who was a man, an old Etonian, friend of school, was at school with Johnson and Cameron, And I won't name him, but he was completely bloody useless. I mean, he didn't, she was in a temper about it. And understandably, she said, look, there's nothing in this. She said to me, there's nothing in this. It's untrue, completely untrue. Well, she was stupid enough. I have to say, she's not a stupid woman, but she was naive and angry enough to say that publicly. And of course, the woman sued. And then she compounded the error by settling. So everybody thought, well, it was a big mistake. Her lawyer, who I know, very, very nice chap at the time, not sadly a defamation specialist, but a very practical and good lawyer who I've got to know, said, I really tried to persuade her to not settle, but she did settle.
Why do you think she did settle? Just,
I don't know. I mean, I haven't had the opportunity to talk to her, of course, but I think she thought that if she settled, it would all calm down as you get on with her life.
Just go away.
Just complete bad judgment and naivety, as it was with actually, saying what she said about Roberts in the first place. When I worked for John King, Lord King, I got on terrifically well with him. I'm very, very fond of him. And he used to get excited like that about Richard Branson. And I said to him one occasion, I said, look, John, whatever you do, don't ever mention Richard Branson's name to anybody. Don't even talk to Isabel, his wife, about it. I said, don't do it. He's beneath you. He's not at your level. He's not. Because he only had 8 planes, for God's sake, at the time. But of course, John was like Ghislaine. He couldn't contain himself. He was so angry that he defamed Branson, and Branson sued. And you don't want to drift into defamation if you can help it. I don't mind. I fight my corner. But
So what is the, obviously you've got to see the personal side to Ghislaine, and everyone else has just seen an impression of what they get the impression of what they've seen in the media and what the mainstream media are telling them. Who is the real Ghislaine to you? What is she?
To me, she's a formidably intelligent and extraordinarily well connected, but never talks about it. Person of just a real Maxwell. They're all vastly intelligent. They all speak a formidable number of languages, and they're just very, very, very well educated. Bob once said to me, I said, what are you going to do about your children? Do you plan for? He said, I'm not going to leave them a penny. He said, they've had a good education. It's up to them to work for, to make their way in the world. Exactly his quote. And that's what he's done. whether it was the right thing to do or not, I don't know, because he left them bearing a huge cross, didn't he? But she's a highly intelligent woman, and with a genuine, I mean, a really genuine passion for the oceans. You know, she's a qualified scuba diver, obviously, but she is also a qualified dirigible, you know, not dirigible, that's in the air, isn't it? Submarine pilot, you know. And she's very, very well informed about the oceans, and for some reason, she develops a huge passion, and she devoted her life to Terramar. It was a charitable venture.
Yeah.
So I found that impressive.
And when did you first hear, you know, when did you first hear about her friendship with Jeffrey Epstein? And what did you understand that relationship to be?
Well, I heard about it when when she was complaining about Virginia Roberts, who was making these statements about her, you know. And I had no idea about Epstein. Of course, I looked him up and tried to find out about it. But I really do believe that, in my personal experience, I investigated a thing called Elm House, which was a place where city people were, you know, using prostitutes and underage boys. You know, in fact, one of the people I knew was a very prominent city figure. Had a plan for buying a country house and establishing what he called a chicken farm, which was young boys for the, you know, entertainment, all these public school boys who learned the delights of you know, well, I suppose homosexuality at their public schools, and they became addicted to it, and you know, led double lives. And I know that these people had hugely compartmentalized lives. You know, they kept the secret. I mean, one chap who was the chairman of a major merchant bank, a peer of the realm, approached me in a public house on one occasion. I couldn't believe it. And I know his son, and his son had no idea. I mean, and I believe that I absolutely believe that Ghislaine had no idea about Jeffrey Epstein's proclivities, you know. In fact, there's strong evidence you will have seen it, Jay, because you've seen all the documentation, but there's clear evidence in a statement by a man called Joe Ricari, who was the senior investigating officer in Palm Beach, I think, and he said, and from memory, he said that he'd spoken to a huge number of people. I think it was 32 people who were really victims of Epstein, you know, and none of them said that Ghislaine had ever been mentioned. He said that Ghislaine was never mentioned. He said, no, so I think she just didn't know.
Do you believe she's being used as a patsy?
What we know, what I believe and what we know is that William Barr was very embarrassed by the death of Epstein. What we know is that Ghislaine suddenly came into tremendous prominence in the press, thanks to the clever manipulation by clever use by Virginia Roberts of the media. What we know is that she was then suddenly arrested, you know. So I see a continuum going through that. Now, why? Well, we have William Barr's embarrassment. We have the possibility that he thought that Ghislaine knew something about Trump wrongdoing, some kind, because he's very close to Trump, of course, regarded Trump's man to the extent that a lot of people complained that he was misusing the position of Attorney General.
Yeah.
I've also done some personal research, and this is just, you know, my view, because I've been looking to why he suddenly acted. And it is a fact that his father, Donald Barr, was the person who really introduced Jeffrey Epstein into sort of public life in a way, in that he was headmaster of the Dalton School, and Epstein became a teacher there despite the fact that he dropped out of college. I think he actually took up his post after Donald Barr had left. But I looked up Donald Barr and started to just read what I could about him. And there's a very interesting book he's written, which is called Space Invaders or something like that, in which he talks about his hero, a man called Craig, having sex, raping a 15-year-old red-headed virgin.
Yeah, I saw about this.
And if you read the excerpt, it's on Wikipedia. If you read the excerpt from this, what he calls a Gothic tale, space tale, you will see that it reeks of paedophilia. It absolutely reeks of it. Then he becomes into a relationship with a lady, with a powerful woman, and they live in her castle where they breed, where she breeds enslaved people for sexual purposes, and he's written about his enjoying the experience. Oh, that's sick.
Yeah,
and maybe that William Barr was fearful of his father's. Maybe that his father was a paedophile, and maybe that he was scared of it being revealed. I can tell you from my experience of investigating paedophilia in the city, where there was a very strong threat of it going on, and Elm House, which was the brothel, that these people, the most extraordinary thing, these people all know each other. They're all part of the same. I guess, we know that child pornography is sent around the world among rings of people in all sorts of countries. And I think there are rings of these people. What I'd really, really like to know is how Jeffrey Epstein first met Donald Barr. How did they meet? And why was it that he was suddenly recruited? I don't know. I might be making 2 and 2 and making 10, but 22. But there's something going on there.
Yeah.
There's something behind.
How do you think the media in general? Obviously, you've got a wealth of experience in the media. You know how it operates, what they look for in a story, and how they cover it. How do you think, in relation to this specific case, how do you think they've covered it? It hasn't been fair.
Well, they've covered it. They've covered it appallingly. Well, they've covered it extremely well if you have absolutely no morals and are just interested in building readership. They've covered it as a salacious story to build readership with no regard for the truth at all. Max Clifford wasn't a nice man, but he was a very cynical man, a very famous public relations man, as you'll know. And he said to me once, he said, your mistake is that you have too much respect for newspapers. They're a branch of the entertainment industry. It's nothing to do with news. He was talking about the Daily Mail and the tabloids in particular. But it's now extended to papers like the Times, where I was so proud to work when it was owned by Rod Thompson, but it's now owned by Murdoch. What can you expect?
Yeah. And how do you think we've learned anything from the Carl Beach case?
Well, what we've learned is that when lynch mobs build up, they build up. And even Tom Watson, deputy leader of the Labour Party at the time, went into Parliament and, disgracefully promoted Carl Beach, known as Nick at the time. It took journalists, and they do, we mustn't vilify journalists always, because, there are people who do good work and dig into work and dig into it. Newspapers run in packs. If you just turn to Jimmy Savile, everybody knew that there was something very odd about it. But it took Marion Jones, BBC journalist at the time, to go against his masters and expose Jimmy Savile for the monster that he was. Now, don't tell me when we talk about Epstein living in capsules, that was what Jimmy Savile did. Nobody spotted it. Can you imagine? What is it? That, and he was right in the middle of a major news and broadcasting organisation. So how much easier it is for somebody like Epstein to keep himself.
Yeah, of course. And so you and I, we've touched upon Virginia Giuffre, or Roberts as she used to be called. There have been some contradictions. Obviously, a lot of my work has been focused on highlighting those contradictions. What do you think personally about Virginia Giuffre, how she's been projected in the press, and what do you think about her credibility?
I don't think she has any credibility, except that she's created credibility thanks to the media support. If you analyse what she said, you've done so well. There are so many contradictions. There's a lot of she almost boasts about. Well, she talks about her drug usage. It's not a boast, but she says, "Then I went back to the drugs." Talks about drinking. I've read that she's been reported on 3 occasions that at least 3 occasions that she didn't sleep with Andrew. And of course, the woman who, interestingly, and I've never spoken to her, the woman who really put her in the limelight was a woman called Sharon Church, who worked for the Mail on Sunday. And in a legal document, she's, I think, described as certainly as a blackmailer and probably as a prostitute too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that's more or less what Ghislaine first told me. So Sharon Churchill, who was with her, has turned against her. But of course, the most significant thing in many ways about Virginia Giuffre, as she now calls herself, as she now is that she's not being called by the prosecution as a witness. And that says all you need to know about her accusations. But that doesn't stop the press from taking them as gospel.
Mm. And why do you think? Why do you think they do take them as gospel? Why the press not?
Because it's the entertainment industry. She was a vaguely pretty girl. She, people like to read about sex and drugs and drink and the rich and the high life, and there's private islands and jets and helicopters and all that sort of stuff that people like. It's like Dallas. It's like Dallas brought to life.
And do you think the Me Too movement has any influence on the case?
The Me Too movement has a huge part to play in this. It's hugely to blame for this great injustice that I fear is about to happen. Because they've turned into a formidable force that that frighten governments.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, yes, Virginia Roberts has made a lot of money out of this, as far as I can see. And of course, so have a lot of other people, including the lawyers. The lawyers have used her as a recruiting sergeant for accusers. And I don't know what the relationship is between the lawyers and the accusers, but you would expect them, if they're taking these people on a conditional fee arrangement, called a CFA, they would be taking up to 40% of any winnings. And these people have been paid off. So some of them have been paid off with millions, I'm told. Nobody knows. And nobody knows the criteria by which the Epstein trustees have paid out money. What's the standard of proof that they've been paid off? And probably justifiably, because it's undoubtedly true that Epstein was an abuser. But the lawyers have made had a really good incentive, a huge incentive to keep this pot boiling and to keep the public relations machine churning. And that's what they've done. And they completely outplayed Ghislaine's lawyers, who should be totally ashamed of themselves.
Do you think you're going to get Ghislaine's going to get, excuse me, do you think she's going to get a fair trial?
No, there's not a chance for getting a fair trial. How can she? It's impossible. Impossible for her to get a fair trial. The die is cast.
So what do you think the best outcome is? What do you actually think the end result is going to be?
Well, she's got a very good case. And the lawyers will have, I think, a field day with the accusers. I refuse to call them victims because they haven't been shown to be victims, despite what the judge says. I think the lawyers will have a field day with the accusers, but they've got a terrible problem, which is that Judge Nathan is against them. Judge Nathan's going to be moved off to somewhere else, upper step, but she's going to continue with this trial. And I think that she's an ambitious woman, I suspect, who will not want the blot on her career of having released Ghislaine Maxwell. So I'm very pessimistic about Ghislaine's chances.
Yeah.
Particularly unjust. Now, inevitably there's going to be an appeal. Inevitably. And it could be that once the news of the trial is out in the public domain, a two-way street in public opinion will develop, because lots of facts will come out in this trial. And it's going to be, the biggest trial in modern American history. And of course, it's all televised. So it could be a big shifter itself, and she might have a chance on appeal. Otherwise, she's going down for 85 years as a death sentence.
And finally, what ramifications? Let's just say that she is found guilty. What ramifications do you think that has for everyone else, for the justice system?
No, the idea of American and justice just don't fit together, do they? I mean, we know from this that the FBI is immoral, the DOJ is immoral, that they've stitched up somebody for public relations and political reasons, for their own self-advancement. And it's evil. Just purely evil. They're not going with the lynch mob, actually driving the lynch mob.